Good evening, everybody. Welcome to First Church, First Center of Religious Science here in New York City. This is our Tuesday evening Science of Mind class using our textbook and also the work of Frederick Bales and some of our other New Thought authors such as Raymond Charles Barker. This is the fifth in 6 classes, and if this is your first time watching, it's great. We're glad you're here. And for those of you who are continuing on, this is some very basic Science of Mind classes. This whole series is meant to be a big introduction. You do not have to follow along in the books or anything like that. Our purpose is to give you an overview and a reminder for some of you of things you might have read or learned in previous classes over the years. So it doesn't matter whether you're new or you've been involved in the teaching for a long time. This type of material, everyone, like myself, I've taken these courses 4 or 5 times over the years, and I'm always in a different place, so they serve to remind me or cause me to think of things that I haven't thought of in a long time. And if you're very new, don't try to absorb it all. Just, take notes on the things that come up for you, and it's a beginning. We start wherever we are. So let's begin tonight. This session is entitled Our Authority. And where do we get our authority? Okay, well, each of us, as we come into this teaching, realize that we are one with the One. So our authority is established in God by the fact that we are part of God. Within us is this power, this presence. It's been with us since the time we're born. It's been with us eternally. It will always be with us. So we're going to talk about that tonight. And we're going to talk again about how our thoughts actually become forms. Spiritual prototypes, they used to be called years ago, on the subjective side of life. And I remember thinking, what does all that mean? A spiritual prototype on the subjective side of life. So when you think a thought, it actually started to take shape. And as it gets reinforced, it becomes more solidified. So the tendency of your thought really has a way of shaping your life, and we'll talk about that this evening. Our body can be thought of as a thought / energy in form. Because, we look like we're standing here, and this podium is here, and everything is so solid, but it's a thought. And it's filled with energy, and it's represented as a form that's always changing. We're going to talk a little bit about our extremes of thought, that can interfere with our progress. Ultimately, we all progress anyway because Spirit is moving through us. But in our day-to-day living, when we have conflicting thoughts, the extremes that we have in our thinking can slow us down, and we'll go over that a little bit. We'll also speak of how my mind, my human mind, your human mind is an extension of the infinite mind. See, and in that we're going to suggest that you're not separate from your Creator. You're not separate from Source. It would be impossible for you to be separate from it, because it is indwelling. It's in everything, everywhere, and all at once. So whatever is true of the infinite presence in mind, there's some truth about that for you too. You may not realize it, but you are one with it, and you're able to keep waking to that, and we'll cover that a little bit more. I know we've already spoken of it some already. As you develop in this teaching a sense, a knowing, a little bit of an inkling of this idea of oneness, omnipotence, omniscience. You're part of this infinite intelligence and power and love, presence, and this consciousness begins to grow in you and me. And as we have that, many of the things that bother us, that have bothered us, or that we've been concerned about, they yield, they give way to a higher knowing. So as you get involved in our teaching, many of the things that plague people in the world or bother people will not bother you in the same way, because you'll have a realization that, all of life is evolving or evoluting, as people say, and you are too, and so am I, and all the world is. And once you have that spiritual knowledge, you will have much less to say about people, places, and things, because you have a realization that everything's in a process of growth, unfoldment, and all of life is moving forward. In our teaching, we talk about transcending problems. It's not that we're in denial about challenges in life. We very much understand factual reality, but the attempt here is to transcend the problem. Don't give it a lot of energy, because we learn here to look beyond the apparent reality to the greater reality. So our authority comes, Mr. Bales said, through being grounded in our spiritual knowledge. When you know that you are one with the one, and that you have this type of connection, and you're absolutely certain of it, you get to speak with a certain type of confidence that you could only have from this knowledge. And so tonight we're going to also talk how to gain this spiritual confidence. And as we do, we'll also gain a certain amount of authority in our spiritual work, in our affirmative prayers. So we're always going to be learning to cultivate consciousness. The consciousness is actually more important than the techniques in affirmative prayer. I've been around a long time, and people will always talk about the techniques. There's a way of doing it with usually 5 steps, and then there are 7, and then some people seem to think you can do effective prayer work with, a couple of steps. And so the real thing here to understand is, as you cultivate your consciousness, as you develop what we'll call a healing consciousness or a higher level of knowing, that's going to be the thing that's going to heal more so than the actual techniques. The techniques can be very useful, and we intend to present at least 2 ways, maybe 3 ways of approaching affirmative prayer. In the end, Ernest Holmes said it best in the glossary: it's the time, it's the art, it's the method of ridding this negativity or this negation from our consciousness. And as you're able to do that, you're going to be able then comprehend and appreciate the presence. You'll sense the presence that's here in you, operating around you in this room and on this call. And that's one of the great gifts from practicing this teaching. You will rise above the cares and concerns that plague many, if not the majority of the people in the world. One of the trends of modern science is in the direction of spiritualizing matter. A modern scientist would say that matter is composed of force expressed as electrons, positive and negative charges of electricity. In the science of mind, we use other words to say the same thing. That matter is spiritual substance, or the substance of spirit. In science of mind, we'd say our bodies are spiritual substance condensed into form, and being in the small what God is in the large. We are more always than just our bodies. We're also mind, and we are also spirit. So let's talk about authority, the foundation for authority. In the preceding lessons, we discussed the threefold nature of being, the phases of the one God, because we're trying to explain how it operates. We spoke of spirit, which by thinking, by thought, selects, it initiates, and it says, let there be. And then as we make these selections within mind, mind always obeys. It's, in other words, your wish is its command. Mind has a tendency, or subjective, to obey and it knows how to bring forth into manifestation the things of spirit. And that's essentially how it operates. The world of effects, which in this teaching we call the body, is the substance upon which the mind acts, and it condenses things into form, and things start showing up in your life. This is, comes from spirit, or you selecting and believing, and then things start to show up. Since this course is not a course on religion, we discuss the threefold nature of being, not for any kind of theological reason, but just to find a way to explain how thought processes work, so that we can follow some type of scientific thinking, or an explanation how to heal conditions that we experience, adverse conditions. So we wanted to give you an inkling of how it works. This sums up the one creative process as set forth by Troward. The process used by, he said, the higher power to create the universe, which would be its body. It's likewise the process we use, whether we're aware of it or not, to create our world, including the conditions in our world and our affairs and our circumstances. We have seen that the paramount thing in the creative process is our thought. We shall now further look at how this applies to the healing of the physical body. Thoughts actually become forms. It must be remembered that thought not only influences form, your thoughts actually become form. To the average student, this is something that will need explanation. Like he or she will say, how can dense matter emerge from immaterial thought? How can anything as solid as this podium or a rock or this piano, how can anything solid like that be composed of the same substance as thought, or the finer vibrations of spirit? We've developed a discussion or an argument that the whole creation was drawn out of an originating spirit. God was, or spirit was. And if that is so, then in some way it must have already been present, within spirit, hidden within spirit. We could all use the illustration of a 3-segmented telescope. At first sight, it appears to be a single cylinder, right? You've seen them before, they extend. But as we pull out the second segment, and then there's a third, both of which are part of its structure. This might appear astounding to the average seeing it for the first time. You've ever seen those telescopes that extend. It's only one, yet it extends into 3. And you've seen that, right? I know you've seen them. For the purposes of this instruction, we might think of spirit seeing itself as the first cylinder, of the telescope, then emerging as the fabricator. And finally, it goes out further as form, the body being brought into view. As mankind, as men and women see it, this would be reversed. We see the body first, the external part, and then we have a sense of the mind, and then finally we look at the innermost, which is a segment, which is spirit. It's only an illustration, and it's reluctantly used since it doesn't fully illustrate the creative cycle, except from the standpoint of the appearance of it. We might also consider again that this illustration from an earlier lesson when we spoke of water and steam and ice. We know that true steam, if you think about it, is invisible. That which we see a short distance from the kettle spout is visible, lowered condensation of the invisible steam emerging right at the spout. Lower its molecular vibration further by passing it through condenser coils, and this very steam will show up as water. And if you lower it still further in condensation by freezing it, it will become hard, it will become solid ice. All these different forms, from invisible steam to hard solid ice, are due to the changes in the vibration of the same substance, and they're brought about by the operation of natural law. And it's by the operation of creative law that thought, invisible and intangible, becomes the solid body of men and women, mankind. Our body is thought energy in form. We say that the body is a living thing composed of thought. Some of our scientists have called this universe itself a living presence. They postulate that the universe is alive. And not just the earth, but the entire universe. And they think of it as a living presence. And they've argued that every inorganic atom is also alive in a certain way. Maybe not alive in the way you and I might think of alive, but the scientists will think even these inorganic atoms are alive in a certain way. If a person continues to think of his or her body as a hard, solid object, it's understandable that their consciousness of healing through thought won't be very strong. See, we don't really appreciate the power, the healing power that we have. So to dispel such an illusion, we shall take up the question from another angle. Every moment we live, we are building new cells to take the place of those that are momentarily wearing out. Physiologists are now estimating that approximately 1 million red blood cells alone disappear and are replaced by new ones almost every second. When we multiply that by other parts of the body, we see that the total number that drop out and that are replaced in a second, not to mention in an hour or a day or any other longer period of time, it's enormous. So we're always being renewed. There's on a cellular level. Every single one of these cells is built under a negative thought pattern or a positive thought pattern. For just as the thought of the originating intelligence is, coming into form and became the universe, so man's thought, within ourselves is always in operation, becoming our body. So it's not a question of man's intangible, weak thought bombarding our hard flesh in an endeavor to change it. It's a matter of man's selecting the highest grade of health thoughts possible. And if we keep thinking of the health we have rather than the illness we have, if we keep on pointing towards our health and acknowledging our health, we'll say, be grateful for your health, acknowledging your health, the aliveness in you. Those are the kind of thought forms that will create a healthy body. My body, your body, is constantly being rebuilt. It's not the same even from one moment to the next. We used to be told the body's renewed every 7 years, and now we know it's much, much, much faster. Some authorities begin to believe that it's built anew every 7 months. You hear estimates, 7, you see 12, 14, but it's always being renewed. Cells are constantly being renewed. Now, atomic science has been the means of giving us definite proof of its renewal. Several doctors, too many to mention. The one that Dr. Bales was mentioning was Dr. Ebersol. When he first heard of the Atomic Energy Commission, said in a booklet that atoms at work, that most in the body are 98% of it. Each of these atoms, in other words, are replaced within 1 year. There's no such thing as a chronic disease, he postulated, but there are many chronic disease thinkers. And so that got me thinking of something that Barker said in a talk last week. It's the same idea. There's no such thing as chronic diseases, but there's many chronic disease thinkers. So we really want to pay attention to how we talk about our bodies and our conditions, because if we keep thinking of ourselves as having chronic conditions, and if we put a lot of thought and energy around that, it might be better of us to be thinking of the health that we have and the wellness that we have, and see how that might shape our greater health. So the question is, what then creates a new disease cell to take the place of a worn out one that has gone. A continuance, Dr. Bell said, of the old and destructive thought patterns in your cell memory. That's all that causes it to keep being sick. So, and this was Dr. Bale's opinion. I don't pretend to be a doctor, but as you follow his thinking, what keeps us in, again, I'll repeat, then what creates a new disease cell to take the place of a worn out one that's gone? And he says a continuance of the old destructive thought pattern. And Louise Hay would say the same thing when she had cancer twice or three times. She said it's these underlying patterns of thought that kept on bringing forth the sickness. And she knew that she needed to get to a point where she released the underlying patterns and replaced them. So if you go along with that type of thinking, you really want to pay attention to your thoughts. And thus it can be readily seen that one big obstacle to healing then is removed if you can get rid of your own self-assessment and your own thoughts around disease and chronic disease. We have next, what he spoke of was extremes of thought. And our extremes in our thinking will get in the way of our healing. We have a lot of self-doubts, but we want to work on them. When you're full of self-doubts, you don't believe that your thought is powerful enough to heal. I'm not a trained thinker. My education has been too limited, you might say. In addition, you might think my willpower is so weak. I know I'd give up before my thought could influence my healing. When a student comes to understand that the healing process does not involve willpower or struggle, the healing process doesn't involve any of that. You have an infinite thinker in you, each of us. I have an infinite thinker within me that becomes, if you're keeping on thinking positively, my consciousness of healing will be greatly strengthened. The student who does this will gain further assurance that when he or she comes to know that the infinite mind flows steadily and continuously through your brain at all times, if you know that you have this infinite mind operating through you, and you keep yourself aware of that, your infinite mind's connected with the infinite mind, right? And so within it carries the memories of countless healings. If you're just thinking sickness, 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 if this is what you're operating with, and maybe your family's always had diabetes, or maybe there's always been something in your family, if this is what you keep on thinking and holding on to, there's a tendency to bring forth illness. So we want to plug into the greater mind. We want to be routed in the consciousness that we're one with infinite intelligence. And that infinite mind carries the memory of countless healings. And this is what we want to draw upon. We want to release the other stuff and the ideas which have been passed on to us. Even a diagnosis from a doctor, which can be very helpful, does not have to be definitive. You are the author of your own experience. So you really want to pay attention to what you're saying to yourself and what you're thinking. When you're in healing mode, you're not dealing with human frailty. When you're in healing mode and you're connected, you're dealing with absolute power and wisdom. The power and wisdom that, it's always been there, but, we don't usually tap into it. So we'll deal with this subject a little bit later in the lesson. There are two extremes of thought which the student can go, and both will defeat his or her attempts to heal. We've just mentioned that self-depreciation, or having a very low estimate of our ability, that will be one thing that will work against you. And the other extreme is if you overestimate your ability. So from the student who has his or her mind on himself as being the healer, herself, rather than on the tremendous power within, they're going to have a problem. So the person who says, I am a powerful healer, if you say you're doing it yourself, then you've stepped out of the infinite placement. I remember being on a panel examining ministers and practitioners, and I distinctly remember a young guy, he was really talented, but he kept on saying, I am a healer, I am the healer, I am a healer. And the part he wasn't understanding is that it isn't him any more than it would be me that is the healer. What it is it's your connection with this power that allows the healing to take place. So the person who says, I am a powerful healer, has stepped out of the infinite placement. He or she who says there is a marvelous law of healing, there is a law of healing, whoever says that will continue to heal. A true practitioner doesn't claim to heal anything, but they know and they are aware that there is this connection that's in them, operating through them, which allows healing. So what we talk about, we don't take credit personally for anything. We talk about this marvelous law of healing. And as long as we're aware of the law and how it works, we will continue to heal. It's noticeable that some of the great teachers like Jesus avoided these extremes. They didn't say they did it, right? And they didn't say it couldn't be done. In the case of Jesus, he was fully aware always that the remarkable healings attributed to him were not accomplished by the human being, not by his self. Jesus, the son of Nazareth. But the healings happened by the wisdom that dwelled within him. When people seem to have, made him into God itself, he said, of myself I can do nothing. And he said, it is the Spirit within, or the Father within, that does the work. And really that was one of the great messages that he passed on, because he wasn't making it about him. And any good practitioner would not make it about themselves either. We wouldn't take claim for that. All that we can say is we have learned, we have knowledge that there is one power. That power is in us and it responds to us. And we can teach people that they have the ability within themselves to bring forth healing. In the case of Jesus, he also said, I and the Father are one, because he knew that whatever source was or is, in the larger sense, he knew that he was a part of it in the smaller sense. And that's true for all of you. Whatever he was, you are. Whatever God is, you are. And he knew, that power that brought, all this kind of healing into the world, into being, was working through him. So that's what we hope you get out of this particular evening, is all the power in the world is available to you, and it will work through you. You live in it, you move in it, you have your being in it, and to the extent you can expand your consciousness to greater healing, you will open up avenues in mind to better relationships, greater health, more happiness, more peace, because you're connected with that power, and it involves yourself developing positive expectancy in any and all of these areas, and you will start to see demonstrations. To bring healing to those who gathered about him for healing, we're talking about Jesus again, it was his sense of oneness, his sense of connection with the infinite. And you're able to do that to the extent you can understand and meditate, take that pause a few times a day and realize your connection. You will be able to say, I am one with Spirit. And you will know that you are an extension of this infinite thing, this infinite mind. It's pretty evident that Jesus considered himself as an extension of the infinite. And there's been others like him who did similar things. They had a great level of self-awareness. In his case, he constantly kept his thinking in line with what he believed the eternal thinking to be. So when we're thinking about oneness, right, we're talking about oneness of thought, true oneness, and practical oneness. We said in an earlier lesson that man is an extension of the infinite. We are an inlet of the ocean, and we're an inlet and outlet. If you look at a drop of water from the ocean as an inlet, and the same proportion, it has within it the same proportion of hydrogen and oxygen found in every single drop. The inlet, though circumscribed by form, is still a part of the boundless ocean. And each of us are, individualizations of God itself. And we have the power, we have the connection with, we're not some small aspect of it, we are a part of it. In a like manner, we have a body, we seem bound by the body, but we're still a part of the infinite. And eternal and indestructible. Man is like the drop in the small, what God is like the ocean is in the large. Whatever is true of infinite mind is also true of each of us. Humankind, men and women, we're extensions of the infinite mind. Therefore, what is true of that mind is true of us. So this is highly important. I mean, you are valuable beyond your comprehension. You're here as a living expression of this power, of this intelligence. You are a point of awareness within it. And then the question comes up in this course, does the infinite have power to transcend every obstacle that we might throw against it? Does it have the power to bring anything to pass, no matter how complex? Well, if it does, then so do we. If the infinite has the power to transcend obstacles that might be thrown against it, then we do too. Does it rest always in quiet assurance of perfect peace and harmony? Of course it does. And if it can, so can we. So we can be peaceful and we can transcend obstacles. We have the power to bring anything to pass. We have that power if we realize we have that power. Does it rest forever in the contemplation of beauty and outer form? Yeah, of course it does. The universe is always smiling there, laying back, as Emerson said, in smiling repose. We have the ability to lay back in smiling repose too and know that all is well. To do all of this, any of this, then our minds can be filled with those things that are beautiful, noble, and perfect. Do we know that our minds can never be left stripped of resources because there's always a steady flow of everything necessary? We can have that too. So this is our spiritual nature. This is what we can wake up to in this teaching. The question, does supply flow like an endless river through every phase of the infinite? It does, and so can it flow through all of your affairs too, if you take it in, if you believe. Mankind's true nature is the nature of this source, the nature of God. When we learn to believe, when man believes himself less, he is believing an untruth. So Mr. Bales was saying, when we have a lesser opinion of ourselves, that's where the problem comes up. The work that we do Thursday night on Louise Hay is, with Louise Hay and Ernest Holmes, which she would say, I love, accept, and approve of myself exactly as I am. Our work really is on elevating our self-esteem and seeing ourselves as the God beings that we are, the individualizations of God that we are. Then our true nature is shown, the nature of God, which is our nature. When we believe that we are less than that, we are believing an untruth. Thus, basically, our troubles that we experience in our life are the result of a false belief. True healing is the healing of all these false beliefs that we seem to entertain. The consciousness of oneness, the consciousness of connection, gives you great power. Since our true nature is nothing but an extension of the infinite, it can be readily seen that what is called oneness with God also includes oneness with thinking. That is, we are thinking God's thoughts all the time. Wherever we have true inspiration and we start to connect with that true inspiration, then we are thinking God's thoughts after they've already come into our consciousness. So God is the conduit that gives you the information through your moments of inspiration, you are thinking God's thoughts. The thing is then begin to act upon them. This oneness of God or source in us is not hypothetical, it's actual. The universe is really always attempting to get your attention. You have an internal guidance system that's wooing you and informing you. And we derive great strength from this idea, this awareness of our unified consciousness. You know, you are one with the one, and to the extent you can be aware of that, you're going to become very strong and powerful. When the personality becomes disintegrated, it is because the person sees two things. That which we desire, which the infinite also sees, and an obstructing power that can block us from the attainment of our desire, which the infinite does not recognize. So the infinite doesn't recognize, when we're looking at things that we want that are not of God and are destructive, the infinite doesn't even see it. So we want to be raising our thoughts on high and being focused on the attributes of God: peace, power, love, joy, beauty, and wisdom. The psychologist, for example, uses the term frustration for what he calls double vision. And it's well known that a frustrated person or frustrated people are always unhappy people. And they can become more than unhappy. They can become neurotic and more. Frustration will be unknown when we come to understand that our true nature is that of God. Our true nature is divine. And we have this, we're born into a world where we have an inheritance because we're part of this infinite presence. So there will be no frustration as we wake to who and what we are. From our physical ancestors, whatever tribe we came from, I guess mine were from Ireland mostly. From our physical ancestors, my parents and grandparents and their parents, we inherit our physical forms and characteristics. And these constitute our physical and our outer nature. From the infinite, though, we inherit something far greater. We inherit a spotless perfection. We inherit a life-giving power, and we inherit from the infinite eternal wisdom that can make us anything we want to become. So these that we obtain from the infinite are our true, they are our spiritual inner nature. It's a sign of human bondage to the negative that we persistently tie ourselves to our human heritage and become one with it rather than uniting with our divine spiritual reality. So you might have been born into a group, a tribe, and whoever they are, whatever the cards that were dealt you might think have been a raw deal or not great. But, you know, we'd argue whatever you had growing up, however good, however bad, it was enough to get you to the place where you are now. And even though there is this heritage that we get genetically and we get through our families and our extended families going back generations, and they may be obstacles for us to overcome, you know, physically or emotionally or mentally, but we inherit something much greater from life itself. From the infinite, we inherit again a spotless perfection, a life-giving power, and from the infinite, we inherit eternal wisdom that can make us into anything we want. So this is our great gift. These constitute our spiritual inner nature. And as we learn to commune with that and unite with that, you know, everything begins to change. Everything that concerned you before is of little importance to you as you continue to live with positive expectancy and live what we call the affirmative life. Frequently, we hear someone discussing a family weakness and excusing themselves by saying, my father used to, or my grandfather, and our whole family does this, and they do that. And they say, well, and I come by it honestly. And the fact of the matter is that your divine qualities far outweigh any weak human heredity coming from your family. That connection you have with the divine is the real connection. And if each of us would continue to live, with a remembrance that I am as God created me, and the realization that I'm connected with something much, much bigger than my family, then you can say, I and Spirit are one. You'll know that the connection you have with Source is really the one that's most important. Once we understand that I'm one with Spirit, our human story, our human heritage would be, submerged. As we embrace the greater picture of reality, then transcending the problem becomes our goal. Once we understand that we're one with life and we're one with every person, and we love our brothers as ourselves, and we really see our brothers as a part of ourselves, then we transcend all these squabbles that we seem to face in our human living. When we're facing weakness or any other problem, we have three possible outcomes. They are fight it, flight, or transcend. Some persons fight with all their might. They're always fighting. You know them. They're fighting against every adverse thing, every unwanted condition. They fight furiously against those who oppose them. And then there are those who seek refuge from trouble in flight. They just want to get away from it. They will, especially will they do this when it comes to their own weaknesses. They will rather just run from them than face them. And this is what they do. When you're thinking of the great teacher, people like Jesus neither fought nor ran away. Most of the great teachers calmly rise in consciousness to the place where they will say, there is that which is not of this world, and they don't respond to the things of the world. So they transcend the problem because these things are not problems to them to start with. Terry Cole Whitaker used to say, what you think of me is none of my business. Because people who are about their Father's business or Spirit's business really are living in a different realm because they're not perturbed and concerned with what's happening all around them in their own families and in the world. They're communing with life and they're seeing life as good and they're knowing they're supplied and supported. There's a level of living where a person does not have to control their anger. There's a level of living where there is no resentment. Anger is simply not there. They understand when people are raging and railing and all the things they're doing that this person is doing what they can with the consciousness they have. So if you're living this teaching to a larger extent, when you've leveled up to that extent, when someone viciously opposes or attempts to obstruct you, you don't get on their level and fight with them. If anything, you unify with them because you're going to realize that you're one with them. And oneness with life and oneness with the Father means to live in a mental world that's far, far above the sordid level of opponents and opposition. And we realize that there's no point of contact. It's just I'm not fighting there. I release the need to be there and do that. So when you're coming from that level of connection, and when you're practicing positive expectancy, you're learning to live the affirmative life. The only thing that can find response in us and attach itself to us is the things we allow in. If you're living on this higher level of transcendence that some of the great masters have, and we presume Jesus had, it's, no one can touch you with that. Of course, it's human nature to want to get even or to retaliate with people and to tell people off. And humans are inclined to this reaction to be right, to have righteous indignation, rather than to what it really is. The lower self finds ego satisfaction in retaliation, and that satisfaction really is a very poor one. The higher satisfaction comes from knowing that there's a greater power in you that is not of this world. See, when you're coming from that place of intelligence and self-awareness, you don't have to get even, you don't have to retaliate, you don't even have to respond, Because once again, you see people are evolving at whatever level they are, and you don't have to fight every fight, and you can't change their minds. The best way to go forward is to love yourself and realize that you're living in a world that's perfectly evolving and whole and complete. Many people think they're dealing with their problems by never asserting themselves, and that's not oftentimes we need to speak. We speak our truth. We don't run away from them, but we don't get troubled by the world. The teacher used an example that there's a wife, for instance, who in the presence of a really overbearing husband who was bullying her, he said, in this example, the wife remains silent for fear of touching off a worse scene. And then there's a person who becomes a doormat at a job or to a fellow employee because they're not willing to face a situation. These people give in when it would be better for them to stand up. It's one thing to give in from fear, right? And it's a totally different thing to refrain from forcing an issue because of a sense of mastery. See, if you're assessing a situation, you realize there's absolutely no point in speaking about this issue because you've tried many, many times before. That can be a sense of mastery. Another situation might be where you're in a situation where obviously something is happening over and over again and you need to speak up for yourself. So in one instance you have, I'm afraid and I need to speak up. But in many instances, you know that speaking up is not the answer, where just having the courage to rise above it is the highest thing to do. So, you're given lots of choices in this life. We call it, it's like a schoolhouse. Rising above it was the sort of courage that gave someone like Jesus his very positive attitude of authority. It's said this way: each of us houses two tenants. There's a larger self that's a part of me that sees beyond the problem, and then there's the smaller self that's within me. The smaller one is magnified by the world in general. It's like most of the world lives with like action and reaction and retaliation. We in Science of Mind seek to magnify the larger self, where we transcend most of the problems and we see that there's a perfection in everyone and all of life is evolving and people are really doing the best they can, even when they're making tremendous mistakes. This is where they are. So we exercise our power of selection because we're a part of this, we realize that, this God is within us, operating through us, and we get to exercise our power of selection. We stand between our larger and our smaller selves. We can hold out the hand to either the lesser or the greater self. When we choose to come from a connected greater place, we're meeting our problems by transcending them. Remember the saying attributed to Jesus, to his mother, I need to be about my Father's business. Oftentimes, it's the way to go, because otherwise you can be fighting all day long with people, and it really isn't, it isn't the best use of your time most of the time. So the best thing to learn is, in religious science, we're part of the transcendental movement. So the idea behind that is we look past the problem. We look to the greater reality. That's really where our focus is. We're not terribly concerned with the things of the world. We're not ignorant of the things that are happening, and we will speak to things we need to speak to. But mainly our focus is realizing that, we have within ourselves a very rich life, and we can think great thoughts, and we can appreciate so many things, if we put our attention, our focus on great ideas and great things. So the choice is always ours. Most of us who are in this teaching, we're looking at where we are in our lives, and we realize that the final chapter has not been written, and we can create a life of peace. We can create a life of harmony and prosperity and good things if we want to, but we have to really want to. If you if you listen too much to what he would call our smaller selves, you could be reacting to things all the time, and that's definitely not what most people who are on this call want. The science of mind is a method to free ourselves from all kinds of bad habits. It's not by fighting them or fighting people, it's by losing the desire for it, because you aspire to live a life of peace and happiness and harmony. There's definitely a higher state of consciousness than just quitting something, right? You get to a point where some of the things that used to appeal to you just don't appeal to you. You don't have the need to argue. You don't have the need to fight. You don't have the need to prove any points. So we aspire, most of us, to live from a higher place, a state where one is so occupied with the goodness and the reality of life as it pertains to his or her own person, that everything less than this complete self doesn't really appeal to you. This is what we shall go into more fully later. Your authority comes through your knowing. In reading the life of Jesus, for example, and I would imagine of many of the masters and mystics, it's interesting to know how often the word authority was used concerning him and people like him. The people recognized a very real sense of authority in the way he spoke. There's a difference in the power of a person's word when they really know what they're talking about. A salesperson, for example, who knows their goods and also knows their competitors' goods so well, if they're ever challenged, can give you all the reasons why what they have is superior. This person has an inner sense of authority that creates success. The same is true of the speaker who really has experience of the truth of what he or she is talking about. The greatest teachers throughout the ages have penetrated into that quiet place in the unseen world where spirit meets with spirit. They touch the infinite and they grasp the underlying law that makes their thoughts so powerful. They have experienced and they know certain things. It wasn't just merely a belief. So there's an authority that comes. Do you want to know how to gain authority in affirmative prayer treatment? If you want, then you must have no uncertainty in your process. The student must develop within yourself such a clear concept of what goes on during a treatment that you have not the slightest doubt that you will have a manifestation or a demonstration. Your prayers, for many things, your pleas are nothing but an expression of your fears and your wants. A student's affirmative treatment must be a statement of his or her beliefs and of their knowing. So you want to get to a place of knowing, because the knowing is higher than just the believing. He or she must know that when they treat and they affirm and they really do it well, that something begins to happen on the hidden side of life that was not happening before they started. For an affirmative prayer treatment is a definite movement in consciousness and mind in a definite direction to accomplish a definite thing. He or she must come into this process sure and certain, with a certain knowledge that my word shall not return unto me void, but it will accomplish that which I intend, and it shall prosper in the thing where it was sent. He or she can gain this certainty by becoming thoroughly familiar with two things. One, there's going to be complete obedience in his or her deeper mind. And two, the readiness of the mind to carry through into form the very thoughts that he or she feeds into it. The beginning of a real sense of authority is to know that the law of mind is obedient. It's just as obedient as the law of electricity. So as we wind down this particular lesson, what we want to be doing is cultivating a consciousness of this connection and this power and this authority. The techniques we will teach you are relatively easy. It's hoped that the student now comes to see the very great importance of their consciousness. Techniques can be learned, and we're going to teach them to you in the coming weeks. Perhaps after this course, we'll do one on teaching, a workshop on affirmative prayer treatment, because techniques can always be learned. Consciousness is a matter of growth and in the cultivation of certain inward attitudes. It's an unfoldment of the real person within. So we're hoping you're building up your consciousness with each and every lesson on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Sundays. It's mentioned by Dr. Bills that thousands of salesmen bought courses in salesmanship and studied, his very techniques, and they were very successful in their careers. So this approach can help every area of life. The big thing he got out of that is, he was talking about his course. I'll say his words. He said, I once taught a course in salesmanship. At the beginning, I explained that I was not going to teach them the mechanics of selling. They had completed courses on that already. He said, I was going to try to impart to them these inner states of mind that, that are so important. And these inner states of mind are going to be the actual things that will create success. And at the conclusion of the course, he said, I received a letter from the board, and everyone's saying that course was the most important course they had. He said, as a result of this teaching, they learned how to cultivate an inner consciousness and confidence. So that's what we're wanting you to do tonight for this week, and to take away from this class, is to build up this inner confidence, this authority, and to realize that you have this power, and keep on working with it. Cultivate your inner consciousness. Our next class will go into the techniques of treatment. So we'll give a basic overview for our 6th and last class, and then we will have a sequel follow-up class shortly, a few weeks later, and it'll be all about doing affirmative prayer. But you'll get the basics next week. So that's going to be it for this evening.